Greetings again. I'm not going to do the brutal joke again. We are clearly not in brutal. Maybe I should say Buenas tardes. Does that give you a clue? It's not Kirby. It's not scam. Okay, it's not speak. Okay, observing reason. We're still going through that because I'm off on a big digression. But I will go back to Hegel with this one to a certain extent, okay? So, right. I'll talk very briefly about Soviet art and about the stuff I was talking about last week to a certain extent, okay? So anyway, there's a lot of, in this section of observing reason, there's loads of dated science, loads of it, right? So it seems to be following, basically, in the footsteps of Schelling, who is another German idealist philosophy. And he was given his ideas a bit of a twist. And Schelling was he was the most important exponent of natural philosophy, natural philosophy in German, natural philosophy, the philosophy of nature. So observing reason does basically just that. We observe how science does what it does in the world. Let me just lower this a little bit. I'm going to lower this down a tiny bit. Give me a second. There you go. Okay, so might get more of the beach in. Okay, so we observe how science does. Basically, we observe how science does what it does in the world, and how the subject, which is us, becomes identical with the object. Schelling is significant around 1800. He's writing because he gives a new account of nature, which tried to solve some of the problems I said before that Kant didn't seem to be able to solve. In the Critique of Pure Reason, Kant described nature in the formal sense, which means that it was subject to laws, which I talked about last time. We're only able to access these laws because the subject, we, depends upon using the categories, which you won't go into, remember last time, as Kant described them as the categories. They are forms of thought to perceive these laws, okay? To perceive the world. And how do you fit the subject into a natural world governed by deterministic laws? Well, we coming back, don't we, to that conundrum. Kant, as we discussed in the previous video, divided like law governed the sensuous world of nature, the appearance from the noumenal world. But if the subject is part of nature, again, how can deterministic nature give rise to this non-determined subject? Okay, big question. And in the Critique of Judgment, Kant tried to answer the problem by arguing that nature produces self-determining organisms. Now, I'm not sure whether that is, I'm buying it, but whatever, okay? So, paragraph 240 of Phenomenology. Reason sets out to know the truth. And what was a thing for meaning, something and perceiving, is now to be found as a concept, which is to say, reason is to have in thinghood only the consciousness of itself. Reason thus now has a universal interest in the world because it's the certainty of having its present moment in the world, or is certain that the present is rational. It seeks its other while knowing that it possesses nothing else in that other but itself. It seeks only its own infinity. Okay, I mean, again, very wordy, very dramatic language, infinity and stuff like that. So the analysis of reason begins with the spectator view of the known subject. So classically, and we've touched on this before a million times, Descartes explores what we know and how we know it through the idea of the subject as passive, as a contemplator. And Hegel rejects this, as the previous passage explains. And as the quote suggests, he suggests that reason's looking actively for itself everywhere in the world. Observation, it's the least developed form of reason and is at first abstract. It assumes an opposition between the observer and the object. Reason, therefore, concerns itself, this is paragraph 241, with things, supposing that it is taking them in their truth as sensuous things, opposed to the eye. Okay, so remember that Darwin, yeah, he hadn't published Origin of Species. So it's easy to get bored in this section and think it's irrelevant. However, there are some important observations that Hegel has about science and about the relationship between us and as humans and the practice of science. Okay, so what I think he's talking about, it didn't have a name then, but I think what he's talking about, what we would understand it as scientism. So scientism is the view that science and the scientific methods are the best, or in fact the only way to discover or extract the truth about the world and reality. Um, Things recognized in natural science form the only proper elements in any philosophical or any other uh, inquiry. And there's people, I saw fellow Ricky Gervais talking to someone who's sort of a bit like that. And he just thinks everything is quarks and, you know, particles, particle physics, and God knows what else. Okay. Um, so science is how we relate to other humans, and that, if that's the case, that just can't be right, can it? You don't get up in the morning and say, "Hello, dear. How is your chemical levels of estrogen?" Or how is, on a scale of 1 to 5, what chemical? I mean, some people probably do, but it's just not the way we talk to people, is it? So it just can't be right there. I don't think so. So the idea that science is ideology free and that exists in an uncontaminated world, um, it's something we should bear in mind when we're thinking through this section. If you try and read it, which is like torture, then it's just have that in mind. So scientists have ideology too, and Western science system, it just shot through it. So a few examples of science not being completely free from it's a neutral thing. Okay, so flexible wage labor. To be even to be able to do science, modern science today, you need a scientific workforce that's able to travel worldwide and work for wages. Okay, it's socially constructed, and therefore, before we even get to do any science, you need a wage labor economy, essentially. Maybe not in the 16th century, because the scientists were like, gentlemen scientists, but now everyone's on a wage, aren't they, if you work for NASA? Okay, maybe I'm cheating on that one. Okay, let's go into a bit more detail. What about, and this is something I'm sure you've all been dying to know, double blind peer review. That's what everyone's talking about, aren't they now? Double blind peer review science. So what it means, these double blind reviews mean the identity of the author and the reviewer are kept hidden. So you can write whatever you want about somebody, okay, and without fear of recrimination. So if the author's identity is unknown to the reviewer, it stops you forming any bias. So with some research sectors, though, that are pretty small, because, if some aspects of, geology, if there's like a, I don't mean it like this, but there's a terrorist attack on volcanologist congress somewhere, then we're not going to have much use for volcanology for the next 100 years, are we? Because there's not a big community of volcanologists. I have no idea about volcanology. I'm just going on about volcanoes constantly. But what I'm talking about, some scientific fields are so rarefied. There's maybe like 20 people working at the cutting edge. But anyway, so because they're so small, it's easy to have an educated guess of who's doing the writing and even who's doing the reviewing. I'll get you. I'll get you, Lone Ranger. You wrote that review about me. No, I didn't. Well, okay, so, and everyone wants impartial peer review. So when you come to review this, of course, which you're dying to do, you're going to write an impartial review. I won't know you are. And you're going to write it and say how great it is or how shit it is. But in practice, double blind peer reviews are just not possible. They're potentially more biased, okay, because we're talking about small communities of people. I'll give you another, okay, so that's one thing, double blind. Another one, competitive funding. That's how science works, a lot of it. So, and it might have some advantages, but I mean, look, it screws up scientific freedom as well, doesn't it? So that's another example. And what I'm trying to show is that science, it's not hermetically sealed. It's not an abstraction. We're not in a laboratory doing a laboratory experiment, looking at ourselves, are we, sealed off? Science is full of human values and human perspectives. Okay, but what about mathematics? Okay, so surely that's a pure science or a pure logical activity. So in 17th century France, apparently, I read this, there were more brilliant mathematicians in France at that time than Europe had created in the preceding 1,000 years. So that's a good fact, isn't it? And that was the age of maths. And maths and philosophy weren't really separated at that time. And to produce meaningful philosophical thought, everyone thought that mathematical methods were just essential. So Descartes was primarily a mathematician who thought that maths was the key to understanding the universe. You know, look at what's his name? Who is he? Isaac Newton as well. Isaac Newton's another brilliant mathematician. Okay, and the purity of maths and the fact that maths could be used to predict and calculate really important stuff like the planets circle and wherever it's they circle the sun, the planets circling the sun. Okay, so and it made sense anyway. Maths became central to philosophy at this time. So Ernest von Aster said, in contrast with Bruno, I don't mean Bruno, you know, the comedian Bruno. What was he called? Bruno. Aye. Yeah. What was he? He's Ali G. He's the Ali G. Not Bruno. Bruno Giordano. Descartes thinks in the manner of natural science and mathematics, in which mathematics thought wins an authoritative influence on philosophy. It is a goal in which subsequent philosophers were especially occupied, metaphysical knowledge embracing the entire world by mathematical method. Okay, so if you just get the maths right, everything else follows. Okay, if I just get this equation, actually, you'd even see it today, don't you? There was an experiment I read in Nature the other day. So in this experiment, they shot some like the hottest particles like since the beginning of the universe. They fired them through some gold substance, and it didn't work out the equation that they thought it would produce. Completely wrong. So loads of particle physics has been proved wrong in the last week, apparently, because it doesn't fit the model. But anyway, that is a very alluring model, isn't it? Because a lot of the time it works, doesn't it? You know, maths works. Most of the time it works. But sometimes the models don't work. But trying to fit everything into the model, you've heard it before. Oh, there's an equation, the God equation, that will solve everything. So that's what I'm talking about here. Now, as a result of this very, sort of powerful pull of mathematics, we live in a very mathematized society. Everything from production of, widgets to filmmaking, film distribution, marketing for new audiences. They're continuously taking new forms due to automation, which are powered largely by mathematical algorithms. So when Google searches for something, it spookily knows, we all know this, what we're looking for, and targets advertisements to us. And that's maths and algorithms for you. I mean, they are seemingly more powerful than the human brain. Okay, so I mean, my view is it's a different view. Okay, so my view on these mathematization algorithms. Okay, so this is something I haven't learned from a book. This is just experience. Okay, so being a teacher for many years, children education, the mathematization of public education, basically for poor kids. It's for poor kids, mathematization. And that's reaching new heights. Almost every week, someone's got a new system that they want to impose on education. And why? Because we've got to find some way to weed out the poor kids, to give the rich kids the best positions in the public school theme park that is the upper echelons of British society. So we have all this math stuff to give you levels. You get the best one, but also you need this exclusive public school, which is what we are, but a public school society. So we've got top private schools with a broad curriculum with loads of playing fields and music and tuition and good stuff like that. And then you've got the Bash Street kids. You've got state schools subject to the most horrendous targets. Targets is about where failure is automatically the fault of the teachers, so you can smash the teachers. But kids are given these attainment levels from the earliest age, from like 3 and stuff like that. So they're given these ridiculous standardized testing, And that's the blanket way. That's why we test for subject comprehension. We test for everything. You know, tying your shoelaces is put in a formula, a mathematical formula. Okay, it's horrendous, horrendous. So you put a number on a child's back. That's what it does. Um, these numbers and the level, they follow the kids around throughout the time in school. And you put in these classes, you will work with these kids. You don't have an opportunity to go on mingle with other kids, you know, sort of like, you know, without levels, like a comprehensive system where you clever kids meet with those who aren't so clever, and the kids who aren't so clever go, ah, right, yeah, I get it now. And the clever kids go, do you know something? Me explaining that has helped me. And you associate, no, you're not having that. You're having a number on your back. So that's what mathematization is about. Children are reduced to data, and it shows. Now, Finland is the best education system in the world, and there's no tests there until the 16. So mathematizing stuff, it's not the golden ticket. And there are still, by the way, endless problems with algorithmic bias. You know, there's loads of stuff that algorithms get wrong and actually create social problems itself. So moving on, science and socialism. So in the Soviet Union, science wasn't quite a religion. Come on, I think it was really. It's on a par. The Soviet government made the development and the advancement of science, and not just a national priority, it emphasized science at all levels of education, and it showered top scientists with honors. Yeah, I mean, maybe we do it in Western Europe, but it was massive there. So you got Yuri Gagarin, Sputnik, dialectical materialism, that was taught to all kids. It was compulsory to learn your dialectics. That was seen as a science, classified as one. Everyone learned it. So science was a religion in the Soviet Union. And for example, in Kiev and Treshina in Ukraine, I walked past it a few times, this school, secondary school, before the war. So I'd never seen anything like it on the wall. There was the huge, but I have to say it, rather lovely, enchanting mosaic of two, I think it was tile, and it was of two people reaching out into space and touching the stars. And I think there might have been some other stuff going on there. But I mean, this is a common Soviet theme. And, you know, you can see it lots in Soviet posters. It's everywhere. Pictures of good-looking, chisel-featured citizens with rockets and pencils and atoms and slide rules and lots of geometry and, you know, triangles and right angles and stuff like that. So if science wasn't a religion, then certainly faith in the goals of science and the belief in the greatness of science was there, because science represented certainty, like dialectical materialism represented certainty. And just like the Christian God promised a wonderful future with him, the Soviet Union held the belief that in science, including Marxism as a science, that can solve all of humanity's problems. And we go to heaven, only it's on earth. So I had, incidentally, an inspirational moment preparing for this video. So remember that thing, I think last time I did Man Controller of the Universe video about Fichte and Diego Rivera and Marx, and I think their relationship, okay? And how the murals seem to me to be a secular version of the Sistine Chapel. I mean, you know, maybe I'm making that one up, but anyway, that was my little thought last time. So if you Google Soviet mosaics Ukraine, because I'm going to try and show you something now, and last time it looked crap, didn't it? You know, like that. So if I can't edit the video, Google it. You'll see what I mean. There's an artist called Viktor Arnautov, and he was a Soviet mural artist who followed, in my view, the Fichte Marx Soviet theme as, you know, man, human, well, primarily male human, as central. So I didn't know it until a few days ago, but Arnautov was an assistant to Diego Rivera in Mexico for a while, right? So this was very interesting to me. So he created large mosaics on public buildings in the Soviet Union, and guess what he created? That there are some fabulous ones in Mariupol. Yes, in Mariupol. He created large tile mosaics on public buildings. So the place that the Russians have now obliterated, presumably along with nearly all of these murals, is where he created this kind of incredible, I'll try and show it to you, incredible mosaic work. One of the most interesting of the murals is called Conquerors of the Cosmos. So you can see, can't you, this mural, Soviet mural, man at the center. And it's just like the Diego Rivera one, isn't it? Control the universe. And there's another, let me tell you what, I'll see if I can get it now. I'll see if I can get it. This is, let me have a look. Is this it? Okay, now there is, I'm going to turn it this way. Okay, there's one. Right, that's in Mariupol, okay? Now you might be able to see that one. Yeah? A bit clearer, that one, isn't it? Yeah. You see it? Geometry, stars. Yeah, it's a nice one, isn't it? And I'll show you another one, which is, let's have a look. It's this one. Oh, yeah. This is man. It's so. I mean, you might be able to see this one. This is man, conqueror of the cosmos. Yeah. Now, can you see? Like go through. See, there's the stars. There's the rocket. Yeah. Beautiful, isn't it? Absolutely amazing. Destroyed, by the way, isn't it? Putin's destroyed this stuff. Some of the lunatics, by the way, you were saying, oh, fascists in Ukraine. Putin's done the best fascist thing by destroying all of this art in a city where we have a link actually with Diego Rivera and a link with kind of, Soviet realism. And he smashed it all up. So these mentalists who were like, these pro-Russian, anti-imperialist loonies. I mean, what is going on? Anyway, moving on, ranting aside, I'll go back to, right, so, again, this Conquer of the Cosmos theme. So many of these mosaics, unfortunately, even before this war, they were like neglected, really. And I think maybe because of the links with the old Soviet Union, and some of them were covered over, some were just destroyed, because they were seen potentially as works of an oppressor. Now, I mean, I don't see it like that. I mean, art's, yes, some art can be like that, but these are really nice, and you can see they're very pretty. They're not like overbearing. However, they do put it's the same thing, slide rules, science as a religion and stuff like that. But I mean, it's not like some of the horrible stuff, which is, which you can see. I think that's really good. But anyway, it's gone now. It's gone. It's history, I think, most of it. As Putin's just flattened the city. So he's flattened all these murals. And it's some of the best public art potentially in the former Soviet Union. Well done. Well done. Okay, an incredible tragedy for art itself. Okay, but anyway, as I said last time, this Fichtean influence, it's all over these mosaics. Arnautov's works symbolizes the Fichtean, Marxist, Riveran thread, this religious thread or religious faith in science. It's science as a utopian fantasy that can solve every problem, from bad plumbing to personal relationships to space travel to anything. That's what it does, okay? And it's, I also think it's in that Michelangelo tradition. It's the Sistine Chapel. Okay, so what is science for? Okay, a big one now, to get into space. That's what's in all of that Soviet art. It's what NASA were trying to do, talk about going to the moon and so on. So defenders of science say stuff like, well, maths got us to the moon, come on. But I mean, there's that famous, is it Jill Scott Heron's song poem, Whitey's on the Moon. Yeah, that one, I'm going to try and do it. So he says, a rat done bit my sister Nell, and Whitey's on the moon. Her face and arm began to swell, and Whitey's on the moon. So what is science for? Yeah, it got us to the moon in the 60s, as, America was riven with poverty, racism, and bad stuff. Okay, so what's it for, though? I mean, the Manhattan Project created the atom bomb. Is it to make an atom bomb? Is it to make a hydrogen bomb? That's science. Value free. I'll make a hydrogen bomb tomorrow. Yeah. Okay, go and do it, son. Ta-da. So anthropologists and human geneticists also, they were important, both in planning and executing the crimes of the Nazis. Psychiatric geneticists planned the killing of they might have actually or conducted the killing of 200,000 mentally and physically disabled people in Germany. So that was science. Yeah. So anthropologists trained in genetics, Joseph Mengele, they selected people for experimentation on the ramps at Auschwitz. Okay, science, value free. Geneticists, they also helped to fashion the marriage laws. You know, the race purity laws in Germany. That was science. Science did that. So just science itself, without having an ethics of science, can get you anything. Zyklon B, you name it. So, but I'm saying this. I'm not dissing science. I'm talking about what we need is an ethics of science. Look, the other thing about science is, if it wasn't for science, I, in all likelihood, wouldn't be here, and neither would anyone. Most of you watching this, because before antibiotics, most people died. So even if I might have survived, there's a chance that, you know, was a 2/3 of the planet would be dead, because that's what antibiotics does. It saves, and you know, modern medicine saves lives. So hooray for science. So we're not saying that. And also the technology behind making this face to cam stuff, that would make Marx and Descartes, they'd cry with joy if they could see what humanity could do. So science is great. It's not science. I'm just pointing out scientism, the problems of scientism. So we need to keep these things in mind, and I think that's what Hegel is telling us about. I think that's what this section's about. Scientism, as I said, didn't exist as a concept then, but he's talking about science's role in society. Hegel again now. So the subject shapes what it observes. So for perception is always, this is paragraph 244, of a universal, not of a sensuous particular. 244. However much the unthinking consciousness speaks of observation and experience as the source of truth, observation, still its words may make it sound as if the whole business were only a matter of tasting, smelling, feeling, hearing and seeing, and the enthusiasm with which it recommends tasting, smelling, etc. It forgets to say that it also, in fact, has no less essentiality, no less essentially already determined the object of this sensing, and that to itself this determination counts for at least as much as that sensing. It will also, without further ado, admit that it is in general not that much concerned with perceiving, and that, for example, the perception that the penknife lies next to the tobacco box will not count for it as an observation. The meaning of what is perceived should at least be that of a universal, not a sensuous this. So, observation isolates one, maybe two, but basically one feature of a single object. Observational science. So that's what scientific experiments is by definition. You exclude stuff when we experiment. We exclude nearly everything, and we just look for one thing. Okay. Now, I haven't switched on a Bunsen burner since I was 12. So, and you know, I didn't even know before that the planets went around the sun. So my scientific knowledge is not good. I'm not coming from a good place. But even I know that observational science picks up and isolates and doesn't take the whole thing into account, because you just don't go in and say, let's experiment about everything, guys. Sorry, they fell off this cliff then. Let's experiment about everything. So you take one thing into account. And I'm saying that Hegel is opposing this unreflective understanding that all science is good all of the time, even though some of his ideas, scientific ideas, were mad. Okay, Hegel in this section seems to be opposed to an evolutionary theory of animal biology. So, as I said, there's a lot of stuff about the science of Hegel's day where the detail's just wrong, and Hegel's main point is a critique, as I said, scientism. So we assume that in the real world that laws operate in the non-organic world of inert stuff. So if we say, well, okay, they work, these laws, they might not work for animals because we can determine, but they do work, the laws of nature work in the tides and stuff like that. But even then, there are people like John Dupre. He says that it's actually quite far from clear cut whether there are these absolute iron laws of nature. And maybe Google that. But once we get to biology and organisms, we have a problem, because organisms have ends in themselves, the desire to live, and ascribing laws to them becomes much more problematic. Scientific claims frequently run the risk of reductionism and determinism. So the science of, for example, behaviorism, that was popularized by John D. Watson, and that says that animal and human behavior is the same because everything is guided by laws. That is what Hegel would have argued against, I think, because, as I said before, so Watson said this, okay, it's a great quote, this one, but it's wrong. He says, real science is physics, all the rest is social work. So totally wrong, but a great quote. One of the great wrong quotes of all time, I think. So Hegel points out the difficulties in formulating and applying biological laws. He talks about, in the section, I won't go on about it, horses and oats and dogs, because observation only examines the properties of organisms in their externality, not in their dynamic aspect. You know, you can conduct experiments, but it's so difficult to do it. So also there are two pseudosciences that Hegel does mention that are interesting. Haven't got time here. Physiognomy and phrenology. So Alistair McIntyre wrote a chapter on a book called Hegel on Faces and Skulls. Physiognomy claimed that the human character was revealed in the features of the face. So I'm just dishonest, you can see. What a man is appears in his face. We treat the expression of the face and the movements of that hand as actions or aspects of the action, okay? And phrenology is a process that involves observing or feeling the skull to determine an individual's psychological attributes. So I've got a completely spherical skull with no bumps, okay, as is my son Chris and grandson Adam. We've got, clearly there's no bumps, so we don't have any psychological traits, because we've got no bumps on our heads. Bump-free heads, okay. But anyway, that's phrenology, right? Okay, so the different areas of the brain correspond to different areas of the cranial bone, supposedly, and the shapes of these areas, the famous bumps on the phrenologists, of the phrenologist, should say, they reveal the different degrees of development of each area of the brain. So neurobiology seems to have faint echoes, I think, of this as well as phrenology and physiognomy. So neurobiology can correlate between brainwaves and states of mind, but it can't explain them. I won't go into it here. If you read the thing, it's pretty good. So it's worth reading McIntyre's Face and Skulls. And if anyone wants that, I'll send it to them if you contact me. Okay, so from gloomy but beautiful Kirby, I'll see you next time, okay? And we'll press on. See you later.